Grace Family Church, welcome to Church Online. I'm Delaney and I am so excited that you guys are here with us today, especially if this is your first time. Welcome. We cannot wait to connect with you. Now I know we are enjoying church at home or wherever you are online today, but next weekend is Serve Saturday. So you can get involved with a campus through Serve Saturday. Make sure you sign up by this Wednesday and you can find all the information on our website. Today we are kicking off a brand new series called God Is. Pastor Hal has a really awesome message. Let's prepare our hearts for it through worship.
Speaking in the silence, moving in the stillness, calming all the chaos. You are joyful in the sadness, comfort in the sorrow, close to the brokenhearted. You are. So give me peace, not of my own. In your presence, I find rest in you alone. So take me to the place where I belong. God, you know me, and you for me, and you see me through it all. So give me peace. Give me peace.
I've searched the world, and it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. I know it's true, and I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain, He's the God of the valley. There's God, we trust you today. Hey, come on, let's sing this out. Our God is mighty and marvelous. We put our trust in your name, Jesus. We believe there's nothing to fear. You are here with us. We put our hope in your name, Jesus. Sing blessing, blessing and honor, glory and power unto our God forever and ever. All of the honor, all of the praise is yours, yours forever. Hands up. Steadfast, unmovable, nothing's impossible, 'cause our God reigns forever. Our God is in control, steadfast, unmovable, nothing's impossible, 'cause our God, He reigns over everyone. Hallelujah, hallelujah, our God reigns. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Come on, in one voice we sing this out. Hey, our God is in control, steadfast, unmovable, nothing's impossible, 'cause our God reigns forever. Our God is steadfast, oh, nothing's impossible, 'cause our God reigns. Yes, He does. Oh, He reigns. God, you reign today. Come on, let's sing this out together. Whoa, oh, 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 our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God. Come on, every voice in this place, let's sing it out. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is, He's an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. We sing it out. Our God is an awesome God. You reign. We trust you, God. Come on, one last time we sing this out. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Come on, let's praise Him today. He's worthy. Thank you, God. You're faithful. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Oh God, we trust you. We trust God, we thank you and we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
The human that he created at that time saw the magnificence and the enlargement as much as his eye could see. And then he looked into the heavens and he saw the expansion of the heavens, and then saw all of the stars, the sun, the moon, and how it operates and gives lights up during the day. But it always shines. It's that the earth is rotating, so that we would know this is a great being. Whoever did this is mighty. How big is your God? How big is your God? You think God is looking for limitations? You think God is a small God? He just wants us to say, God bless me and my wife, my son and his wife, us four no more. That's not God's plan. God wants the whole world to know about the gospel that cost him the death of his son. Just keep trusting God. No matter who you see over yonder, no matter what you hear over yonder, just keep trusting God. How big is your God?
Wow. Do I even need to preach after that? That was incredible. Let's give it up for our creative team. They did a great job with that. Yeah. I'd like to welcome everyone tonight, everyone today to the Van Dyke campus here. I'd like to welcome all of you that are watching on our campuses. I'd like to welcome our Waters campus. I'd like to welcome our Ybor campus, our Land O'Lakes campus, our South Tampa campus, which is where I was at for about 3 years, but I left and I don't think anyone noticed. And of course, my home team, the Temple Terrace campus. So, yeah. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Hal Mayer. I am the campus pastor at the Temple Terrace campus, and I'm actually over our young adult ministry, which is called The Exchange. But I've got a question for you. Have you ever heard this phrase, you never want to meet your heroes? Like, if you look it up online, it's kind of interesting. It's people that had these heroes, and what do you do with heroes? You hype them up in your brain, right? You have this idea of what they would be like. You have this idea of how incredible they would be, and then you meet them, and you're like, they're just a normal person. I mean, for my son, this happened recently because, he had been watching several Spider-Man shows. What Spider-Man shows, he saw the last movie, he was excited about Spider-Man, and I realized he was about to have some disappointment because he was going to a birthday party, and I heard they were going to have Spider-Man there. And look, it's great that they're going to have Spider-Man there, but it's not going to be the same. And what happened was they actually showed up, the people that were doing the outfits, but they came as Spider-Woman and not Spider-Man, but they're like, we have a Spider-Man costume. And so my next door neighbor goes, I guess I can fit, and he puts the Spider-Man costume on. And he goes over and he becomes Spider-Man. And this should not, this shouldn't throw any women out there because you've seen your husbands do this, right? Like, you've seen him, all of a sudden he puts on a superhero costume and he's looking in the mirror like he's ready to fight crime. Like, you're out just trying to trick or treat and he's looking for evildoers. Some of you have seen this. You've seen your husband, especially if he's ever had the Thor's hammer, he's set it down and walked away and then just gone, come to me. Like, he's trying to get it to come to him. Look, we know it's not going to happen. We know. But in our mind, we're going, what if? What if I could actually control that? Well, my next door neighbor, he's doing everything Spider-Man does. He's rolling on the ground. He's jumping up in the trees. He's doing all the things. And he's having a lot of fun in it, but he is limited to being a 37-year-old work-from-home dad with that amount of agility. And so it's not working incredibly well. And so my son comes home and I was like, hey, how is Spider-Man? He goes, well, the cartoon's better. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, he couldn't shoot webs. I was like, yeah, well, maybe he left those at home. And he's like, well, he couldn't jump from the tree to the house, and I don't understand why he can't do that. He goes, and to be honest, Dad, I think he's our next door neighbor. Right? But here's the deal, and what I want to get in this, sometimes we're similar with God. We base our belief off of God in that moment. We know everything God's done. We know everything God has been doing. In fact, many times we look back in our life and God has moved mountains for us, but in that moment, in that second, God's not doing what we call him to do, and so we judge God by that moment. We test him in those things and we go, God, if you right now just do what I want you to do, God, if you help me in this way, or God, if you heal me in this way, then I will believe that you are God. But many times we tend to base our idea of God of what's in front of us, not what's happened before us. And so what we do many times is we shrink the size of our God. We shrink the size of our God to what's in front of us right now. And really, I think we're okay with that, because I think with a small God, we realize we can run our own lives. With a small God, I get to do what I want to do because I'm the one that's in control. And every once in a while, he may come through, but I'm okay with where he's at right now. See, A.W. Tozer said it this way. He says, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. It's the most important thing about us. So when we're in these positions where we're not thinking very highly of God, when we're in these positions where we're wondering if God is there, the best thing we can do is open up our Bible and look at who God is. And a great spot to start is Isaiah 40. I'm going to pull a couple verses out of there. Isaiah 40:12 says, who else has held the oceans in his hand? Who has measured off the heavens with his fingers? Who else knows the weight of the earth? Who has weighed the mountains and hills on a scale? It says, God sits above the circle of the earth. The people below him seem like grasshoppers. He spreads out the heavens like a curtain and makes his tent from them. To whom will you compare me? Who is my equal? Asked the Holy One. Look up into the heavens. Who created the stars? He brings them out like an army, one after another, calling each by name because of his great power and incomparable strength. Not a single one is missing. See, when you see that version of God, when we hear about that version of God, we're like, okay, God's big, but right now in 2020, is he asleep? Like, what's happening? Did he stop working? What's going on right now? Did he lose control? Is he not in control? Is he not strong enough? Or has he just become smaller? And let me just say this. If you feel this way, you feel the same way as many other people, and you feel the same way as a guy named Gideon. Gideon in the Bible was a guy that felt like God had forgotten about them. See, Gideon was a guy who was a part of the Israelite nation. To understand Gideon, you got to understand their history. See, the Israelite nation was chosen by God, but God gave them a covenant. Basically, here's what it was. If you do what I'm calling you to do, if you obey my commands and you worship just me, you will flourish. You will have lots of babies, you will have lots of crops, everything will go well for you. But if you go against me, you stop obeying me, you bring other gods into play, then I will allow other nations to overtake you. And so what you see happening is the same thing that seems to happen in our lives over and over again. You see the Israelites having good things, blessings, all that, and they forget about God and think it's about them. So they take over their lives. They start working at themselves, and then they start bringing in other idols, and they start worshiping those on the side. And then God goes, finally, all right, this is enough. Usually after about 100 years, and he allows another nation to take them over. See, in this moment, Gideon's nation have been taken by the Midianites. It's 7 years in, and he's freaked out. He's wondering, where is my God? See, what Gideon is going to learn and what we need to learn today is this first point, is that God is bigger than our circumstances. God is bigger than our circumstances. But when we catch Gideon, here's what he's doing. He is threshing wheat at the bottom of a wine press, which is not where you thresh wheat. That's where you hide. And the reason he's doing this, because the Midianites had very much like terrorist-like tactics. They would wait for your fields to grow, then they come through and burn them. They wait for your cows to become mature, then they come through and kill them. They would do things just to keep you under their thumb. And Gideon actually lived right near the border of the Midianite territory. And so he is freaked out all the time. And right now, he's just hoping to get enough wheat to feed himself and his family. And he's thinking, I don't know where God is, because Gideon at this point had assumed God had forgotten about him. But we see Judges 6:12, God show up. It says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, mighty hero, the Lord is with you. Sir, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Notice this, he calls him mighty hero. I'm sure Gideon was like, wait, me? I think you're looking for another wine press. That's not me, I'm hiding, God. How did you find me? But he says, sir, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us out of Egypt, but now the Lord has abandoned us and headed us over to the Midianites? It's the same thing we think today, right? God did miracles before, but does he still do them now? It says, then the Lord turned to him and said, go with the strength you have and rescue the Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. But Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in my whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family. See, Gideon's like, I don't think you've got the right person. I'm the last person you would think of. But what does God say to him? He says, go with the strength you have. Now, I want to make sure we get this here. Because sometimes we can read something like that and assume this, that we're enough. We can read that and we can believe that we are enough. And here's what I want you to understand. We are not enough. I am not enough. You're not enough. Pastor Craig's not enough. None of us are enough. Now, I'm not saying you're not, God didn't make you in his image. I'm not saying you don't have gifts and talents. I'm not saying that we're garbage and we have to look at ourselves that way. No, I'm not saying that. There's a difference between believing that we have gifts and talents and understanding that we're not enough to do what God's called us to do. See, here's why this is important. One, because in the areas that we think we're enough, those are the areas that we tend to kick God out. And second, it's actually the moment where we don't think we're enough where God shows up. Where's Gideon? He's sitting at the bottom of a wine press, scared, afraid, believing that he is not enough. See, I need you to get this. God did not call Gideon because he was courageous. He became courageous because of God's call on him. Okay? God's not calling you because you're just courageous. When we realize what God's call is for our life, he brings us courage. See, God does not call the brave, he makes brave the called. And when we understand who we are in God, it changes everything, right? Because our identity drives our activity. And if our identity is cemented in God, it allows us to see and do so much more for him. Because when we realize what God says we are, we go, what isn't possible? See, Gideon's being told who he is in God. Gideon's being told he's going to lead them to victory. And a couple verses later, you actually see Gideon build an altar to God, and he names it Yahweh Shalom, which means the Lord is peace. Which, catch this, a couple verses earlier, what's he doing? He's in the bottom of a wine press, fearing for his life. Yet we go forward and he's building an altar saying the Lord is peace. Why? Because he realized that God was bigger than his circumstances. Because he was in the presence of a God that was bigger than what was in front of him. See, I need you to understand this. Our peace is decided by who or what we rest in. That night, Gideon was resting in God. See, when we try to rest in our own ability, when we try to rest with us holding on to everything in our life, we don't get rest and we don't have peace. But when we give it to God, we have peace. See, what's great about God is his answer to fear is not get over your fear. God's answer to fear is his presence. It's his presence. The answer to our fear is getting close to God. And when we get close to God, we realize how big our God is, and it brings peace into our lives. But Gideon had some work to do. Because like I said, they were going away from God for a long time. And while they're going away from God, they picked up some idols along the way. And Gideon knew in order for them to follow after God, they were going to have to get rid of the idols. And in the same way, we have to do the same thing. You're like, how? I don't have a bronze statue in my house. Look, an idol is anything where you don't put trust in God. It's anything that you take away from him. And so what they were doing in this time is they were literally calling out to God, but holding on to their idols. They were going, God, I want you to help me, but just in case you don't, I have this. Does it sound like us? So God wanted them to understand, needed Gideon to understand this, that God is bigger than our idols. God is bigger than our idols. Judges 6 says this. It says, the night the Lord said to Gideon, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old, pull down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole standing beside it. Notice this. Whose idol is it? It's his dad's. It's the town's, but it's maintained by his dad. So he's not just cutting down his idol, he's taking down his family's idol. It says, then build an altar to the Lord your God here on this hilltop sanctuary, laying the stones carefully. Sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar, using as fuel the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down. This is awesome by God. He's like, take the altar, burn it to burn a sacrifice to me. It says, so Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord commanded, but he did it at night because he was afraid of the other members of his father's household and the people of the town. Now, we can read that last verse and go, wait a second, there's fear. How did God react to that? And sometimes we think this, we think God's expecting us to go from little or no faith to big time faith. No, God is good with the baby steps. See, God's looking at what Gideon's doing right now and he's applauding going, that's good, that's a baby step, we got another step. So many times I think we think God wants us to go like right off the bat into incredible faith, but many times God's looking at the things nobody else sees and going, good job, take another step. I mean, it's kind of like this if you guys remember going to a friend's house before you had kids, and they had a baby that was learning how to walk. And you saw the kid and they're like, yeah, he's getting ready to learn how to walk. And you're like, I don't know how that's possible. His head is 50 pounds, his body's 5, right? You're like, that just doesn't look like it's gonna happen. And you're watching it, right? And you're watching and they're all excited and the baby pulls himself up on the side of the couch and they're like, all right, he's getting ready to do it. And you're like, okay, we're about to see something. And they're going, come on, walk to me. Come on, walk to me. And the baby does what? It takes one, it gets its head going forward because that's the key. That's where the weight is. And it takes 1 step, 2 steps, falls over on the ground. And the parents burst out, oh my gosh, he walked. And you're like, what? That wasn't walking. That was stumbling. Like, that looks like he's drunk. Is he okay? Like, what are you talking about? And you sit there and you think that, but then what happens when you have kids? I remember with my own son, we're trying to teach him how to walk, and the way we did it was he would come forward. If he took a couple steps, we give him craisins. Craisins literally taught my son how to walk and crawl. And literally, he would take a couple steps and fall over, and we're like, here's some craisins, good job. And he'd take more steps, and we give him some craisins, and he would keep going after it. And look, this is the same thing with God. God's going, hey, you took a couple steps, that's awesome. Let's keep going. Here's some craisins. But I don't know what your first step is. It may just be the fact that you showed up today. It may be that you got in a group for the first time, or it may be that you actually asked your friend to come to church and they're here today and you're like, man, God, please keep Pastor Hal from saying something weird or political. But what is Gideon doing? He's tearing down the town's idols. Why? Because he understands you can't worship God and something else. Like I said before, you're going, Hal, I don't have an idol. Look, it's anywhere in your life where you're not trusting God. And one of the areas where you can see that is where in your life is there blatant disobedience that you're okay with, or large amounts of fear and anxiety. I mean, the blatant disobedience, I see this all the time in young adults ministry. 2 people get together and they're like, Hal, it's just working. It doesn't matter if I do it God's way or not. We're having fun. Yeah, I've seen this all the time with people who are older that we've already got kids. Why do we need to do it God's way? I'm okay with doing this the wrong way. And I tell you what, you haven't lived until you've had a high school girl who's been dating a guy for 1 month tell you, Pastor Hal, you just don't understand. I hope one day you have the kind of love that we have for each other. Bless your little naive heart. He had that kind of love 2 months ago. Anyway. But maybe it's our work. Maybe we're okay with cheating in certain ways or doing things the wrong way. Where's your fear and anxiety? Where is it right now? In 2020, it feels like all of it. Is it with your kids? Is it with your family? Is it with your money? See, I need you to understand, we can't wage war against the outside till we wage war against the idols of our inside. I mean, for me, I have had them too in our family. I mean, what's crazy is I always remember seeing people send their kids off to school, and I'm like, and they're crying and all that. I'm like, what's the big deal? They're going to school. All of a sudden, our 6-year-old goes to school, and I'm like, oh man, he's such a nice kid. And I met 6-year-olds that are jerks. They'll hurt his heart, and all of a sudden, what happens? You start to have to give your son's heart to God. You start to give your family to God. You have to start giving those around you to God. You start to give your money to God. Why? Because you realize in His hands He's safer anyway. How we get to this is believing this, that nothing short of God will ever satisfy. Nothing short of God will ever satisfy. And I believe this happens in many different ways, but we see throughout the Bible, God always values the relationship over the blessing. And here's what I mean by that. If you today, God gave you everything you were praying for, would you still pray? Because here's the truth, if we're honest, if what we're praying for God gave us, we would stop praying, God's not in the business of replacing Himself. God's not in the business of giving us another idol. Sometimes we're going, God, please just bring me a spouse. God, please just bring me a new job. God, please just fix this thing. And God's going, here's what I understand. You're not here to get close to me, which is what you need for the rest of your life. You're here for the blessing in the moment. And I'd rather have a relationship with you than give the blessing in this time. See, that's why we see God so many times work in the Bible, and the way he works is he always makes sure everyone knows it was him that did it. See, with Gideon upcoming here, he wanted them to understand it's not Gideon that's leading you into battle and winning the battle, it's God. Because what happens if everybody worships Gideon? It's not good. What happens if everybody worships God? We have victory. And so what you see God doing is he puts together an army and a way of defeating the Midianites that just doesn't make sense. I mean, Gideon gets together his army. There's 32,000 men, and there's still less than the entire army. There's still less than the Midianites. And God goes to Gideon. He goes, hey, Gideon, that's too many men. Gideon's like, I've never heard that battle tactic. What do you mean? And he goes, here's what I want you to do. I want you to say, if anyone's afraid, they can go home. And Gideon's like, well, these are warriors. Of course, I can ask that. And he goes, hey, if any of you are afraid, go home. 22,000 leave. He's got 10,000. God goes, we still have too many. Gideon's like, you're kidding me, God. Like, what's going on? He goes, here's what I want you to do. I want you to bring them down to the water, and I want you to watch the way that they drink and split them into two groups. Those that pick up the water in their hands and lap it like a dog, and those that reach down and just drink the water directly out of the river. And I want you to separate them in those two. And he goes, I want you to take the ones that pick up the water and lap it like a dog, which shows us once again that God likes dogs better than cats. But actually, that's not what it is at all. It's the fact that you're looking for someone that's paying attention to the world around them while they're drinking. He's looking for the better warrior. And so God brings them together. Guess how many that was? 300. 300. Going against an army that's bigger than theirs in the first place. Gideon's going, well, at least God's going to give us some incredible weapons. Nope. He gave them a ram's horn, called a shofar. He gave them a torch, and he gave them a clay pot. I'll be honest with you, I'm really happy I wasn't in Gideon's army. Because I can imagine, like, I'm a sarcastic individual. If Gideon's handing me these things, I'm like, you're kidding me, right? It's like, here you go, Hal, here's your horn. I'm like, well, that's awesome because everyone knows, everyone gets freaked out whenever the band arrives. Oh no, here comes the horn section. Like, thanks, Gideon. That's great. It's okay, that's not it. Okay, cool. What else do we get? A torch. Oh, cool. So when we blow the horn, they can know where I am. Good, thank you. So they can stab me. Thank you. That's great. You gave me a torch. That can light the way to their victory. That's cool. Thanks, Gideon. It's like, okay, on top of it, hey, you got a clay pot, which, you know what? I could see maybe. You could hit somebody with it. If it breaks, there may be a part that is sharp enough so you can stab somebody. But hey, Gideon, here's an idea. You want something stabby? Just throwing this out there. A sword. Maybe? Can we get something that actually works? It's like, no. You have a horn, a torch, and a clay pot. In Judges 7, we see what God does. It says, it was after midnight, after the changing of the guard, when Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the Midianite camp. Suddenly, they blew the ram's horns and broke the clay jars. Then all three groups blew their horns and broke their jars. They held blazing torches in their left hands and their horns in their right hands. And they all shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon, which is funny because neither hand had a sword. But then God shows up. It says each man stood at his position around the camp and watched as all the Midianites rushed around in panic, shouting as they ran to escape. When the 300 Israelites blew their ram's horn, the Lord caused the warriors in the camp to fight against each other with their swords. Those that were not killed fled to places as far away as Beth-Shittah near Zerah at the border of Abel Mahola and near Tabath, which is not the right way of saying it, but I said it fast and that's all that matters. But here's what I want you to understand. Why did God work this way? Why did God give them these things? Why did God reduce the army? Because God wanted all of them to understand. He wants us to understand that God is bigger than our battles. That God is bigger than our battles. See, the God we serve looks at a situation that looks like it's impossible and says it's possible. The God we serve looks at a situation where we are outnumbered and says, it's okay because you've got me on your side. See, God's given us victory. God's given us a plan. Some of you going, wait, what's his plan? I don't know what's going on. Do you even know if God has a plan? He has a plan. How do we know that? Because he sent Jesus. And we know the end of the plan is when Jesus comes back. It's just the middle part that we're struggling with. But we know God's got a plan. We know that God has a victory in this. And here's what's great about being a Christian is that we can sit back and understand while we're doing God's work that God is in control. We can understand that God has already won the battle. We can understand that God has already given us victory. We can understand that God is sovereign over everything, and that's going to be okay. But here's the problem. I see people many times posting, well, God's sovereign, God's in control. Yes, he is, but God's sovereignty is not an excuse for laziness. God's sovereignty is not an excuse for laziness. Gideon still had to go to battle, right? He still had to go to battle. He still had something to do. See, we are the activity of our generation. We're not here to coast until we die or Jesus comes back. We have a job to do. See, many of us need to stop asking God why he isn't active in our work, in our home, in our family, in those around us, and realize that God's calling us to be that activity. He's calling us to be that change. See, I don't know the battle that God is calling to you. I don't know what he's calling you to do, but I know this. Whatever's on your heart right now, it's the Holy Spirit that's pushing them there. He's the one that's preaching to you right now, convicting you, showing the area that you need to change, that you need to take a step forward in. See, God is calling you to something, but I need you to understand, without God, we've got a torch, a horn, and a clay pot. With God, we have victory. See, what comes to mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. How big is your God? See, that affects your next step. If your God is big, it affects your next step. For some of us in here, some of our circumstances are so crazy, we just can't see that, and we need to see the bigness of our God. For some of us, we have idols in place that are keeping us out of relationship with God, that we're holding on to, that is creating fear and anxiety in our life that we need to put aside. For some of us, we need to hand our battle over to God. Look, I don't know what your next step is, but I know you have one. For some of you in here, your next step is your first step. Your first step into a relationship with God. And at this time, I'm going to ask the campus pastors to come forward to lead you in that next step.
Thank you guys so much for watching with us and joining us on Church Online. Be sure to share with your family and friends what God is doing in your life. And we want to know too, so tag us on social media. Have a great weekend. We'll see you guys next time.